Welcome to San Francisco, Phil.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
And you have a long history with this city, and there's been several notable Roxy performances going back to the Wonderland. Do you have any interesting memories you can share about your experiences here?
I do, but first of all, I'd like to dedicate this evening to Mark Hancock. Okay, he's the chap who sadly passed away recently, but from Palo Alto. I think his two sisters are here tonight. And the reason I'm dedicating is because there's a story behind this. Mark Hancock came to the school where I was studying in South London in 1967. And he told us about all the amazing bands here, what was going on at Fillmore. And he told us about the Dead, he told us about Jefferson Aeroplane, he told us about Quicksilver Messenger Company. We were incredibly excited. So the first time I came to San Francisco to play was with Roxy in 1972. In fact, 17th and 18th of December 1972 at the Winterland. And was anyone here there? Probably not. They're too young. But yeah, we were third on the bill to Steve Miller, Mike Bloomfield and Friends, and Roxy. And it was a very strange pairing. However, we were, me, Eno, Brian Ferry, Andy Mackay, Paul Thompson, very excited because we only had to pay for 25 minutes and then we could go back to the hotel with a bunch of the weirdest, most fantastic people from San Francisco and have a party. We never got to see Mike Bloomfield or Steve. We were just having the time of our lives. So San Francisco, very important. And I think also my friend Mark Hancock was at Berkeley. So I actually vaguely remember going and sleeping on the floor of his accommodation, student accommodation. So that was very exciting. And then going to possibly a family dinner. There's Gay and Autumn here from that family who might be able to remember better than I can what actually happened. But so I was there on Christmas Eve, and then we flew on Christmas Day to Miami to play at the Miami Speedway. So San Francisco was very exciting back then, and I don't think we came back to San Francisco till like 1974 or 5, when John Weston was in the band and Eddie Jobson was in the band. So, and I have footage, Super 8 footage I used to take of us larking around through these streets.
Of course, you have this amazing new book out, Revolución to Roxy, and you chronicle the Roxy evolution and story in incredible detail. What were some of the key revelations that emerged for you when you dug deep into the story?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book was to try and make sense of what happened, because time seems to fly by. And the older you get, time seems to accelerate. And it seems like yesterday when that all started, but of course, it's a hell of a long time ago. And you try and reassess things when you get a bit older. So I was trying to make sense of my rock and roll career, if you like, and how I got to that point. But I also wanted to tell my 60 cousins, I have 60 cousins on my mother's side in Colombia, where we came from. So the story starts in the book, starts in 1492, and it ends in 2022 at the O2 in London. So that's the sort of time arc of it. within that, yeah, you know, lots of things happen, but you know, in the musical side, lots of things happen. And of course, I have been back in other band formations with David Gilmour a couple of times, and actually only with David Gilmour over a 10-year period. Sorry, what was the question? I told you you could ask whatever you wanted. I said to Neil, do not tell me what you're going to ask. You'll probably get a different answer.
Were there any intriguing revelations that came out of it? Anything that surprised you when you reflected on your journey?
Only, I seem to have done quite a lot. And I sort of felt a bit like Forrest Gump or something. I seem to appear all over the place with all sorts of people. And I looked at, there's 100 pictures in the book. Obviously not a great writer, you know, but I wanted lots of pictures. And that goes back to my days of comics, basically. You know, I was brought up on Superman, Mad Magazine. I'd like to say lots of literary sort of novels and things like that, but I was crazy about comics, and Marvel comics and superheroes and things like that. Because of really the American influence when I was in Cuba and in Hawaii and in Venezuela and stuff like that.
Right, so you came to Roxy via this 1971 ad in Melody Maker, which had language that ended up becoming really a career manifesto for you. What was it about this ad that grabbed you, and why does the message still resonate for you to this day?
Well, yeah, this ad was in the Melody Maker magazine. My friend Bill McCormick had gone and joined Robert Wyatt's group, and I thought that was the end of my career in pop music. And he said, there's an ad for that band, Roxy, who sent me a demo last week, and it says, the perfect guitarist for Avant Rock group. And I thought, what the hell's that? I'm still wondering what that is, and we all are. So I'll get back to it. And then I looked at original tick, creative tick, adaptable tick, yeah, fast, slow, like elegant, yeah, witty, scary, yeah, stable, not so, tricky, yeah, okay. So that sort of sums up all of them, actually. Eno, Brian Ferry, Andy Mackay, more than me, but I thought I could work with that. So I rang that number, and Brian Ferry and Andy Mackay were living in a very small house in Battersea in South London. Andy Mackay they were a bit older than me. Andy Mackay was a music teacher at a place called Holland Park Comprehensive, and Brian Ferry was teaching pottery to an all-girls school in Hammersmith. So, go figure. Anyway, I met these guys, and I met them, and Eno was there, and I thought, these guys are special. And they said, oh, why don't we have a jam? I said, okay. It was in their dining room, there was no drums or anything. And I said, great, what should we play? And they said, well, any number with 2 chords. And I thought, this is heaven. I'd just been in a prog rock group playing 13/8, 17/8, and now someone just wants to play 2 chords. And a little bubble in my head, because they were sort of arty types, I thought this could be the British Velvet Underground. And the Velvet Underground only had 2 chords, so even 1 chord. And it worked for them, so I thought, this is heaven, these guys are special. I want to be a part of this. So we had a chat, we got on very well and everything. And then I discovered that I'd failed the audition. Fools, I thought, fools, I'm the perfect. But they were very ambitious, or at least one of them was. I'll let you guess which one. And they got a guy, amazing guitarist called Dave O'List, who was in a band called The Nice, who I'd seen play on an amazing tour that came to America. The Nice, first Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, and Amen Corner. And he was terrific. I thought, well, fair enough, he's a professional musician. But when it's the ads for the little gigs they were doing started appearing saying, Davo lists Roxy Music, I knew his days were numbered. And then when he had a punch-up with Paul Thomas, the drummer, in front at the audition for a management company, which I happened to be there, his days were definitely numbered, because as the manager walked out, and he is now the manager of Roger Waters, Mark Fennick, as he walked out, I heard him say, get rid of the guitarist. And I said,
Well, within 6 months of joining, you transformed into this guy, this quintessential rock star. You were donning your famous bug-eye glasses on top of the pops. Tell us about the look you adopted and the reactions you got.
I'd love to say that it was all my idea, but what happened was there was this amazing fashion designer just starting out then called Anthony Price. And I'm afraid he died a couple of months ago, which is very, very upsetting because he was so crucial to the look of Roxy. And in the book, you will see a picture of what they call our civic clothes, what we were wearing when we were doing gigs before we started recording the first album. So the timeline is, it's the 31st of January, my birthday, I'm 21. The 1st of February, I go and somehow do another audition and pass that audition. On the 14th of February is the date of the first Roxy Music contract. We did 4 pub gigs and then went in and recorded the first album. I went to the photo shoot not knowing any, these guys were like art students and Eno and there's this guy's been brought up in South America and has pretty much no idea of what to wear or anything. I get to the photo shoot and this guy, Anthony Price, well, we all, for a start, I've only found this out recently, we had the pictures for the first album cover, we all, first of all, did in all our normal clothes. And then Anthony said, look, I've got these really wacky clothes that I've made for myself. Why don't you try putting them on? Why don't we do a roll of film with those clothes? Including the bug-eye glasses that he made himself. And those ended up on the cover, and that became part of the whole zeitgeist of dressing up and getting back to more visual kind of presentation of music. Anyway. There you go. And that's what I would have looked like here in December 1972 with that same outfit, because we only had one outfit.
You said because you couldn't see out of the glasses, that it made your live guitar work more spontaneous and edgy. Talk about that.
Avant-garde even. People used to say, wow, that guy, he sounds like there's a guitar, like Sonny Sharrock, like really abstract sort of girl. I said, wow, he's really avant-garde, and I couldn't see a thing. But it worked for Virginia Plain, because Virginia Plain only has 3 chords, and they're all close to each other. So if you look down, you can actually see where you're going. But when it came to tracks like Ladytron, it was perfect, because Eno used to trip my guitar, and I just make up the craziest sounds with feedback and all sorts of stuff that, made people think that we were quite so experimental.
What do you consider some of your guitar highlights with Roxy?
Ooh, how long ago? No, I mean, I did my bit, contributed bits and pieces here and there. But luckily we had from the second album on, we had a fantastic producer, Chris Thomas. Big hand Christmas. He was the assistant to George Martin, worked with the Beatles from the White Album onwards. He knew all the Abbey Road tricks. He taught us how to, what they call part play. You know, when you hear all the versions of Beatles songs that they did before they reached the final one, which we all hear and love, it's the distillation of your guitar parts till you get something that's absolutely correct and perfect. And like when you hear those Beatles tracks, everything about it is perfect. George Harrison's guitar is immaculate. It might be small and short, but it's perfect. And Chris Thomas taught us how to do that, and how to continue in what we call the British tradition of record production that was going on and came out of Abbey Road, as opposed to what was happening with the Beach Boys, for instance, and Brian Wilson and all that experimentation in the 60s. So, yeah, I mean, I am going to do a track, in fact, a sort of mashup track that I made up in the studio, and it's the last 10 minutes, morning, and it contains pretty much a lot of the riffs that I used in Roxy and 801 and No Church in the Wild. So, you know, you'd be able to hear, I guess, my greatest flops and hits in that mashup.
I am curious if there was any competition within the group for who could create the most attention for themselves via their fashion choices.
Well, the thing about all the outfits, and you know, you've got Eno with the plumes and Brian with the Diamante thing, is that apart from that one time on that album cover, first album cover, when Anthony, you know, had a go at styling us, I suppose, if you like. After that, none of us ever knew what the other was going to wear. So, and we'd get, for instance, when the first album was released on the same day as Ziggy Stardust. Okay? June the 21st or something like that. A week later, we supported David Bowie at a pub gig in Croydon called the Graham Croydon. So I got to the gig a bit early, and so there was David Bowie and Spiders. They were all dressed up in their outfits, you know, the gold lame stuff. They're all sitting on chairs, and I walk in and I think, I'm just wearing jeans and stuff, and I've got my stage clothes in a little bag. I think, God, they wear that all the time. They really live the part. We just come to gigs and put on, like actors or something, put on our outfits. Anyway, we said hello and everything. It's a really small gig, and actually when I used to meet up with David, we'd always have a good laugh about that, because he used to say to me, if I had a quid, that's £1, for every person who said he was at that gig, I would be a millionaire. I said, you are a millionaire, but that's not good. He said, yeah, but Phil, there are only about 50 people. So, but what would happen in the Roxy dressing room is that we'd all turn up in our jeans or whatever, like or casual stuff, and I'd say to him, right, okay, what are you going to wear? Show me. He said, no, you show me what you're going to wear. And none of us, you know, and this would go on for about 20 minutes, and the tour manager would come in and say, for God's sake, put on your clothes and get out on the stage. And so Eno would come out, have all these feathers and things. What the hell? I'd come out in an armadillo outfit. And it's like, who did that? You know, and Brian would come out something different. We never, there we are. That's it. We never spoke to each other about what the outfits were going to be. The first time we saw each other's outfits was literally just before we were going to go on with gigs. So, and they were done by different people. And so there was no styling, it was just sort of totally random. I think, I see you cunningly led me into that. And I put out that picture with Frankie.
Speaking of Eno, besides the fashion stuff, you had a very, very close musical relationship with him during the Roxy years, and it continued after he left in '73 through both of your early solo albums as well as 801 Live, of course. What made you so compatible as collaborators?
We were very, as you can see from tonight, we're very into technical things. And the British Heath Robinson method, where everything sort of went wrong and you had to improvise, you know. So when we were trying to create weird, wacky sounds, you would make sure the studio manager wasn't looking. He'd put screws in the piano and dampen different bits and treated instruments and got a broom handle and took the tape out of the control room and let it go all the way around, and they put sticky tape on the capstan of the... So it was that sort of... It was in the days before they invented, you know, sampling or all this studio trickery that exists now, and you had to make it up as you went along to get a weird and wacky sounds. And so the early Roxy was full of very interesting, different kind of sounds, which nobody has ever continued doing, because now you can buy a pedal that does something. You don't have to work so hard at it. And that came from the BBC radiophonic workshop, which was a sort of music workshop that developed music for TV programs like the Doctor Who science fiction shows and things like that. What was that? Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's the name of that. The lady there. Okay. Aha. Joshing. There was a lot of humour in Roxy. You know, when I always wanted to be in a band ever since I was, like, a lot of people, once the Beatles happened, so many musicians said, I want to be in a band. And you hear it every week on interviews, I think. But one of the great things about being in a band when you start is this camaraderie, and you're having a good time. And you think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the 5 Musketeers. All for one and one for all. Then it becomes all for one and all for none, you know, and then, you know, all the saber swords and things, everyone starts impaling each other instead of like, going forward. So this is a really good period, and you know, what this shows actually is that we wanted to do kind of weird music, but it wasn't sort of po-faced intellectual arty type stuff. It was just meant to present interesting music, but presented it in a visually attractive fashion. And that supposedly was Avant Rock, although no one told me.
Well, Roxy has such a large footprint, but it's fascinating to consider that it was technically only active for 7 or 8 years between 72 and 82. What are your thoughts about why it was able to successfully morph across these 3 really different approaches across such a short period of time?
Well, like a lot of bands in those days, you were expected to do 2 albums a year and go on tour and promote it. So it's incredibly pressurized state of affairs, but, you know, we were young. You know, that basically you're talking about my 20s, you know, and I wanted to be in a band, and there was a challenge. And the challenge was, for Roxy, was that nobody in the band was a proper songwriter. So if you watch Let It Be, the Beatles documentary, oh, it's gone, and you see McCartney writing Long Winding Road or something. You see, that's proper songwriting. Someone has a melody and they sit at a piano and play. The way Roxy recorded the albums was basically say for instance, me or Brian would say, right, I've got 3 chords, and then everyone just jammed on it, and then we recorded it with all the parts, including the solos and everything, with no top line and no idea of what the lyrics were going to be at all. We'd hand it to Brian, say, good luck, see you in a couple of weeks, and hopefully you come up with something. And it was incredibly exciting. You can imagine, say, the track Love is the Drug, without any vocals on it. Okay, so that's a pretty good groove, and there's a great bass player from Liverpool on it called Johnny Gustafson. He was in a band called the Big Three that the Beatles looked up to. They were the musos of Liverpool. And so you record everything to do with that track, and you've got no idea what the top line's going to be. And then Brian comes in, and you look at him and you say, all right, in you go. And we all sit there, so like, and he just sings that, the whole thing, and we just shout, hooray! We've got a single. Well done, you saved the day. And that's what happened for 10 years. It was hit or miss, and I should say it's probably about 80% successful. I'm not going to tell you which tracks are the 20%, because they might be your favorite tracks. Okay, that's an Eddie Jolson co-write, so I can't possibly comment about that.
Well, Roxy reunited for one last tour in 2022, including a very memorable...
You saw it. Thank you.
We had a very memorable stop right here at the Chase Center in San Francisco.
What I loved about that tour, we invested in the screens, and it was the first time, and as it turned out the last time, that Roxy were ever able to play their music in the visual context that we really felt it should have been in. In other words, all the iconography that was up, all those images, and even we used images of Warhol stuff, which we didn't realize we had to ask permission. So when we got to New York, the Warhol Foundation came to the show and said, what? And then presented us with an enormous bill, obviously, but it was worth it. So, and also it was very sort of moving to see people enjoy themselves, people singing along, especially the tracks that are big in America with More Than This and Avalon, and knowing that it had some resonance. When you get to this stage, the band's been going for a long time, those kind of things are important. You like to feel that people are enjoying it, and it means something to us. And it means something to them. So the deal is like justified,
So while the door has closed on Roxy, the door is reopened for your pre-Roxy band, Quiet Sun.
Very excited.
So for people who are unaware of it, talk about the group and its approach and what we can look forward to later this year.
Okay, Quiet Sun was the band when I was banging on about a prog rock band. By that stage, it was going nowhere. And we'd had all these letters saying, this band, from record companies saying, this band has 0 commercial potential. And so we secretly recorded that Quiet Sun album while I was doing Diamond Head, without telling the studio manager, who was a guy called Muff Winwood, who was the brother of Steve Winwood. And he became the studio manager, but he also was the person who wrote the letters saying, absolutely no commercial potential. Right? So we were recording it. He had no idea we were recording it in Island Studios. And when it came out of Melody Maker and got like record of the month. And we went into his office with both letters. The letter from him saying this band has zero commercial potential, and the great review from Melody Maker. I just add that it sold very few copies. He was actually right. However, it has, been out there, and people have got to like it. And it was basically a band that was in I guess you call it the Canterbury School of Music Soft Machine, Caravan, that area. And we had met Robert Wyatt when we were at school when I was 15 or 16, and so he was a big hero. And they were on that tour with Jimi Hendrix and the Nice in America. Way back, and so when they released their first album, we had it when we were at school when 16 or 17, so big influence. And so Quiet Sun was trying to be like a Soft Machine, but probably not as good and not. But we made a great album, and I've spent the last 6 or 7 months with the guys from Quiet Sun, and we have done a new mix and a Dolby Atmos mix, and found some extra tracks, so that's going to come out at the end of July. But we thought, well, okay, we're going to, why don't we do a new track, stick it on. So one track led to another, and then, so we have a brand new Quiet Sun album coming out at the end of October, and we're hoping to get into the Guinness Book of Records for the longest distance between the first album and the second, 52 years. I think it sounds, I know I'm biased, but it does sound incredible, and some of it is stuff that we wrote in '72 that was in notation form, and we hadn't looked at since then. We decided to do it, and one of them was written by Bill's brother Ian MacDonald, who wrote the famous book Revolution in the Head about the Beatles, who's sadly no longer with us. So I think people are going to be amazed how different, and I don't know what to call it actually, but anyway. Hopefully you'll like it.
So just 1 year after Quiet Sun's Mainstream, you launched into 801 Live in 1976, and that band lasted 6 weeks by design. But its influence has endured ever since. Talk about how it came together and your ambitions for it.
Well, in some ways you'd think it's a typical Eno project. Let's put together a band that only lasts 6 weeks. Let's have 3 people who are into technical stuff and 3 people who hate technical stuff. Let's put them in a room and let's do some covers and see what transpires. But we'll only do 4 or 5 gigs. As it turned out, we only did 3 gigs. Luckily, we recorded one of them, and that became 801 Live. And yeah, thank you. And of course, it had the incredible drummer, Simon Phillips, who is an absolute superstar. He was like 18 or 19 at the time. After that concert, everyone came knocking on his door. Jeff Beck, Stanley Clarke, Mick Jagger, Toto, just toast of people. And he gives master classes now. So it's worth listening to just for the drums, quite frankly, that album. It's a masterclass in drumming from somebody so young. But very cheekily, the first number, Tomorrow Never Knows, we played that live, which was like a big, ridiculous risk, really. But we did it, yeah.
And the way 801 Live was recorded recorded was incredibly impactful in and of itself. What was unique about how you did it, and what influence did that have on your later work?
Well, funny enough, the way we recorded it, all other live albums had been recorded basically from the point of view of the audience out there, and we just close mic'd everything. So it sounded like a studio recording with very little ambience from... Now, for some extraordinary reason, nobody else had done that before, so it became very popular and influential. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize at the time, until I read Wikipedia, and it said years later about the recording technique of it. We just had a mobile recording studio and close mic'd, as you do in a normal recording studio.
All right, well, I think that brings us to a performance review.
Good, okay. Well, I think I explained what it is. I'm not sure, but we'll see if you can recognize any of the bits from some.
last solo album, The Sound of Blue, and the track is almost a microcosm of all of your musical influences. Talk about putting it together.
Okay, so I wanted to do an instrumental that reminded me of my mother, and so I didn't want to do anything too obvious, so it was a combination of that first melody sequence, which reminds me a bit of Black Orpheus, and then I wanted to really do a track that had a bit of Santana type influence, you know, because when I first heard Santana, I thought, wow, yeah, they've got the Latin groove with rock for the first time, and so did it so well. So the groove was great. So, you know, all those things had a flavor that, and of course, you know, instrumentals, you can call them whatever you like, quite frankly. And but this, you know, I had in mind my mother when I was doing it. Yeah. The reason I dedicated to my mother was because she is the person who started teaching me guitar in Havana in 1957. So I have a lot debt to her, and it's been with me always, this music. And you know, a lot of British guitarists, famous guitarists like Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton and David Gilmour and so, you know, when they started in the UK learning to play the guitar, a lot of them quote the Burt Weedon Play Any Day book. That's what the go-to book that you went to in the early 60s of Jimmy Page, probably. And, but I had none of that. For me, it was the music of the east of Cuba. There's the kind of songs that we eventually heard in the Buena Vista Social Club that I first started learning, and boleros and famous songs that were popular in South America and Latin America. So I have a lot to thank her for, and I have her guitar. Thank you. Okay, yeah. So, various pictures. The first one on the left, age 4, before in the UK, and then to the right, me, when I was doing the book, I was discovering the things, and especially to do with my family side, and there's a narrative, as I said before, that starts in 1492. And I discovered that picture of me as a baby, which honestly I don't remember ever seeing before. And then the picture with my dog, Winnie, in the garden in Havana, Cuba, me dressed as Zorro. Aficionados of Roxy might remember the 1974 tour of Roxy where Brian actually looked like Zorro. And when I saw his stage outfit, you know, I said before, we didn't see each other's outfits before the tour, and they turned up on stage looking a bit like that. I thought, yeah, I can relate to that. I dressed up like that when I was 7. He did get a bit of stick from the New Musical Express, actually. Something gaucho, they call it, I can't remember. And then the pictures to the right, my father and my mother and Franca, who was her best friend, who started learning to play the guitar at the same time, and that's why my mum started learning to play the guitar, and me, as annoying, this person dressed up as Zorro, kept pulling the strings on her guitar, and so she said, mire hijo, deja de fregar con esa guitarra, te tengo que enseñar unas cositas, pero si no me vas a, te voy a matar. That's for those Spanish people. She didn't really say that. I was going to kill you if you don't stop touching my guitar. Although I feel like that with some of my grandchildren. No, that's not true. Sorry, it's a cheap joke. Sorry, Claire. I digress. So she then taught me a bit of what they call acompañamiento, which is just accompanying yourself with songs. And and that's her friend Franca there. So eventually, you know, we had to leave Cuba after the revolution. It was too dangerous for foreigners. We go to New York, and then I said to my father, he worked for an airline company, where are we going next? And I was happy to be watching a thing on the television of people surfing in Hawaii, on Honolulu, and he pointed to the TV and said, that's where we're going. So, strangely enough, we came to San Francisco. So, age 8, I arrived in San Francisco. The only bit of San Francisco I saw was the dog quarantine, where that dog was quarantined. So I can't say that I saw Alcatraz or anything like that. But en route to Honolulu, and then eventually to Venezuela, and I begged my parents to send me to England in 1960. I arrived, age 9, as a boarder in South London, and I was absolutely delighted because I'd been brought up on eating black beans and rice and everything, and I wanted English baked beans, and I wanted spam fritters and all the terrible things that are eaten in the UK, and sausages, dreamt about. And so they sent me to this posh school, and then the Beatles happened, the Stones happened, the Kings happened, the Who happened. It was the most incredibly exciting time. Then Jimi Hendrix came to London. Then Mark Hancock from Palo Alto came, told us about what was going on here in San Francisco, and it just, my head exploded. And so I said to my mother, I was age 15 going on 16, I'll stay at school and do all the exams and everything, but I want to be, they didn't call it rock musicians, I want to be in music, a pop musician or something. And my mother said, ¿Qué? ¿Qué es eso? Cumbia? Check. Salsa? Check. Rock? ¿Qué es eso? And so my brother, who was 8 years older, said, okay, look, I know this guy, I just met him. I met him up at Cambridge University. He's just joined a band. Let's go and talk to him, have lunch with him, ask him what you have to do to become a professional musician. So we go up to Earl's Court in London, and that guy was called David Gilmour. Incredible. It was the week that he joined Pink Floyd. After, he says he can't remember what he told me, but it must have been good because I managed to get into Roxy 5 years later. So where's this percentage? No, he didn't. I meant it. After lunch, we went back to his apartment. He put his Stratocaster in his case. He went to Abbey Road to start recording the first album he did with Pink Floyd called Source Full of Secrets, which Syd Barrett was on it as well. So it was incredible. So by that stage, just turning 16, I had met David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, and I had met Robert Wyatt from Soft Machine. So 2 of the coolest bands in London at that time. So when you're that age and you meet someone who you think is a rock god, and it's a bit like having a mentor or something, you think, maybe I met this guy, he's really nice, pretty normal really, perhaps I could do that. So it's a great thing to have somebody mentor you when you're wondering what you're going to do. It's not just in music, but in any field that you go into. So I was in London, I was in South London, and people would come to school and they'd say, last night we saw this great wacky guy at a pub called David Bowie. It was at the Arts Lab. And they'd come back, and that was the beginning of David Bowie, and then he wrote Space Oddity. So we knew all about these people when we were 16 or 17. And it was a very exciting time to be in London. And then the Doors and Jefferson Airplane came to play in London. And Spirit, one of my favourite bands for another, came to play in London as well. So, and then the Mothers of Invention turned up. And we saw a crazy bunch of fantastic musicians there. And our heads were exploding. We got to do bands and stuff, and that's Quiet Sun came out of that. And you've heard the other bit of the story.
We were talking about Latin influences and primitive guitars. That had kind of the deepest initial crystallization of those for you. And it was also a truly solo effort in that you played and produced all of it. So talk about the decision to take that approach and what you learned from doing it.
Well, when I did primitive guitars, I had a recording studio. We'd recorded half of Flesh and Blood at my studio. We recorded all of Avalon at my studio. And I was just sort of getting fed up with songs. Okay, I wanted also, being a band, you have to serve the song. If I was playing crazy stuff underneath the track, Avalon or more than this, it just wouldn't have worked. So I wanted to be free again. And one of the main reasons I became a musician was to be free and not to have to do what I was told, I suppose. That's why I'm a terrible session player. I mean, luckily David Gilmour put up with me for 10 years. But, he had to teach me how to play, Wish You Were Here and stuff like that in his kitchen and stuff. I hadn't learned it. So primitive guitars, I thought there's a Colombian instrument called a tiple. And it's 12 strings and it's highly strung. And I thought, I'm going to do a track with a tiple, but with lots of echo and treatment on it, and use it in a way that hadn't been used before, and still, incidentally, hasn't been used. I haven't heard it unless someone knows of an album with jazz tiple or whatever. So, I started experimenting with that and with beats, and I think one of the tracks was used by a rapper, one of the first R&B rap kind of songs back then, because it used drum boxes and things like that. But I was using my studio. But embarrassingly, it came out pretty much at the same time as Avalon, not intentionally. And it got a review in Rolling Stone, which they reviewed both albums at the same time. And I was in Australia at an airport, and I picked up the copy of Rolling Stone, and I looked at it, and I read the reviews, and I hid it, because I didn't want the others to see it. But I got a pretty good review. It sort of was better than that, which is ridiculous, obviously. But I remember distinctly putting it in my bag and saying, so no one see, the rest of the band don't see that. That's not in the book. You're getting bits here. He's wheedling bits out now. It's almost like a therapist or something. Things are coming out. Help.
What evolution as a guitarist did that record reflect for you, and how would you assess the distance traveled since?
Well, there's a great expression in Spanish, viaje sin rumbo. And that sums up a journey without any direction. I never thought of music as being a career for me or anything. I just wanted to, it enabled me to be free to have musical conversations with other musicians from all different countries, and to enjoy music and not be chasing chart success. Or really, I mean, a lot of musicians came from the 60s weren't interested in being pop stars. They really were into the music. And I must say, all the people in Roxy still are experimenting with music in a way that we did right through the period of the 70s, whether it's Brian Ferry, who did an album with a girl who was speaking like poetry. Eno is continually doing albums that are sort of improvised almost. And his latest thing with P.T. Wolf. Then me and Andy Mackay have just done AM/PM, thank you, which is actually a return to what we think it was the mission statement of Avant Rock. So when people ask me, what is the AM/PM album? We say, well, it's Avant Rock, isn't it? So it's funny how it sort of circular, and Paul Thompson is working with us on that too. So 5 of the 6 people in the original bass player died, I'm afraid. But we're all still doing music for the sake of music and not chasing the charts, you know.
Yeah. Let's dig into the AM/PM thing a bit more. Talk about the evolution of that partnership and how you arrived at the approach the two of you are taking these days.
Okay, so after that farewell tour, Roxy, and me and Andy decided that at the O2, that really was going to be the last Roxy tour. Also, Brian wasn't feeling so well, health-wise and stuff, so we thought it was a bit, you know, imposition to make him keep, you know, playing, singing when he didn't feel quite up to it. So we decided to do the total opposite of a songs album. In other words, do something that was pretty much 90% improvised, but do it in a way that you could use tech, the way it's come on in terms of Dolby Atmos, in terms of different speakers in a room, which I suppose Floyd sort of did to a certain extent in the 70s with their quad sound. The difference with Dolby Atmos is that it's up and down and around, and it's immersive. So we decided to play music live that was immersive. So we went to a small screening theatre in Soho in London, and we gave 3 concerts to about 70 people in a screening room with a huge screen. We made special videos, we projected them onto each other, and we had this surround Dolby Atmos sound. So it's quite innovative and different, and we had no idea what it was going to sound like, but I always say Andy forced me to do it in case it went wrong, but actually people seemed to like it. So we're on a different exploration, you know. So that is the basis, and we wanted to bring it to America, and we tried, but it was proving too difficult. We thought maybe we could play at film festivals and things, but you have to be in a room that's got this special sound system. So maybe it can be done. So we're out there trying to do these new kind of innovative things.
So you mentioned your friendship with David Gilmour that went back more than 50 years. You went on, of course, to eventually contribute very significantly to both Pink Floyd and his solo career. Talk about that evolution and how you look back on that work with him.
Well, as I said, I met him early on, and then I had, in the 90s, we wrote a song called One Slip, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which became, you know, the title track of a Pink Floyd album. So I had a bit of previous, and you know, he hadn't, when I started working with him on an island, he hadn't done an solo album since About Face. So, you know, that was a hell of a long time. So he had loads of stuff on little mini discs. And we sort of lived next door to him in the country. Even though when I say next door, it takes about 10 minutes to drive to his front door because he has so much land. But so that started a working relationship that went on for like 10 years. And that's when I went on tour, and it was very enjoyable. And that first tour, Rick Wright was still alive, and he was in the band. So it was a thrill. And incidentally, it all came full circle when we played at the Albert Hall in London. And David Bowie came on for the encore, and it was the last time he ever played in London. Nobody knew that he was coming on for the encore. And also at the same concert was Robert Wyatt. So for me, it sort of brought together all those fabulous, my mentors, and on one stage, in one night. And it's the only time I ever played live with David Bowie. He did Comfortably Numb, and he did Arnold Lane. And the audience went wild. And it's on YouTube, you can see it. But it was one of those very special moments. And there was special moments with David on tour, with David Crosby and Graham Nash singing. That was very special. And then, I was in David's kitchen one day. He said, when Rick was still alive, we did a lot of jamming and stuff, and there's all these tapes that, why don't you take and see if it's worth pursuing to do an album? So, in the end, that ended up as a Pink Floyd album, The Endless River, which was really a tribute to Rick Wright. And I spent 6 or 7 weeks going through all these little snippets, and the one thing in my mind was trying to honor Rick's kind of organ playing, especially when he was playing a Farfisa organ, which is one integral part of Pink Floyd. Just as Roger's bass player, David's singing, and obviously his guitar playing. So that ended up, and I remember sort of driving along in the car listening to masses of Pink Floyd stuff and thinking, God, if those Pink Floyd fans knew that I was doing this, they would be pretty excited, hoping for good stuff. So it was a treat for me, who loved Pink Floyd right from the first iteration with Sid Barrett and so, to be involved in that world. And so, that gradually came to an end, and Roxy started happening again. And so, as before, there's no particular career path. It just, things happen randomly, and I go with it, like when Jay-Z and Kanye West sampled my guitar. I had no idea. Nobody, took my riff particularly, just by random chance. There's this guy called 88 Keys, who lives in New York, was a friend of Kanye West, and he specialized in sampling records, analog records between 1975 and 1977, very niche, making samples out of them. And so the record company rang me when I was in the car going on and said, "Hi, is that Phil Manzanera?" I said, "Yes." It was on speakerphone. And my son was in the car with me. And he said, "Just want to tell you that Jay-Z and Kanye West sampled your guitar, and the record's coming out next week." And I said, "Hang on. Everyone always gets me mixed up with Ray Manzarek." I think you got the wrong person. So they said, no, I think it's you. Obviously, we can't send it to you, but we'll play it to you down the phone. So I'm in the car and they're playing this thing, and I said to my son, Charlie, get your phone and record it. And actually, we'll go back to the studio, do all sorts of crazy things, send it back to them and say, yeah. So, funny enough, he did find that recording about a month ago. So actually, can verify that this actually happened. So they said, well, I said, oh, well, that's great, goodbye. And then I said to Charlie, can they do that? Are they allowed to do that? So I rang up the record company who owned the copyright on it, because that is from a solo album called Casco. And, thank you. And I said, they just rung me. Do you know anything about this? Oh yeah. No, don't worry. You're going to be very happy. I said, but what about if it's got terrible words on it or something? So horrible words. I said, look, don't worry. We've done a deal and you're going to earn more than they are. I said, oh, okay. So then I thought, well, hang on, I wrote it as well, rang up the publishers. Do you know anything about this? Oh yeah, no, we know. Don't you think you should have told me? This is typical of numpty musicians. The record companies sort of do things and you don't really know. But so you'll be very happy. Well, of course, so then they used it. It was #1. It won a Grammy. It was in films. It was also some car ad during the Super Bowl. I said, thank you, God. After all those years of just pursuing music and never making any money, he said, look, take that. So it was a sort of the weird things that happen without you even trying. So it's typical of the music business. What you've got to do is just stay calm, stay in your lane, keep doing music for the right reasons. Things might happen. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you've been involved in the careers of a lot of other artists as well, and of course you've produced albums for people like John Cale, Split Enz, Nina Hagen, David Gilmour, as we've discussed. What are some of the philosophies and approaches that you bring to the table as a producer?
Think about, if you produce people who are very talented, you can't go wrong. See, that I mean, look at Chris Thomas. Produced Roxy, produced Elton John, the Sex Pistols. I mean, very, very bunch of people, but all talented people, and they come up with great songs. And all you've got to do is to sort of steer the ship well. And it's like David, he doesn't really need a producer, he just needs another person to bounce ideas off. But you've got to be able to make suggestions about different approaches if someone's stuck. But, as I said before, I was very lucky to sort of learn about music production from Chris Thomas and also work with Brian Eno a lot. So my sort of shtick is a mixture of stuff that I learned from them and experience. And I guess I've done about 80 albums. So I sort of know what I'm doing. But you have to believe in your ears, and it's just a series of yes and no's. Is that good? No. Let's do it again. Is that good? Yes. Okay, if that's good, what's the next step? Is it yes for this or no for this? And you just go on the creative process, if you like. And then, but you do have to know about technical things. But I was always, and I am always, a sort of producer from the George Martin School of production. I'm not an engineer. So many producers are engineers first. That happened at a certain point. But I prefer to think conceptually. What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? What is the song about? What are you trying to convey?
So producing Split Enz actually led to two of your most recent albums, which are duo efforts with Tim Finn, that's Caught by the Heart and The Ghost of Santiago. And of course, Tim also worked on Listen Now and K-Scope. Give us some insight into what makes that relationship so enduring, and tell us a little bit about making these albums.
Okay, the one thing about Split Ends was that, from my point of view, is that it contained two incredibly talented brothers and singers, Tim Finn and Neil Finn. And of course, Neil Finn has probably been more successful in terms of chart success because of Crowded House, and just wonderful songs that Paul McCartney wished he'd written. Don't Dream It's Over, and I understand he's written some amazing songs, and Tim, in his own way as well, has written not so commercial songs, but together they wrote Four Seasons in One Day, some great Crowded House songs as well. So, working with very talented people is just a joy. Incidentally, I think this week they are headlining for the first time in 40 years. Split Ends have got back together, they're doing a tour. They're headlining a big festival in Auckland, and then they're going to Australia. And I think they're going to come to America, and seeing the two brothers on stage singing is just absolutely spectacular, and so many hits, and great hits. So, working with very talented people, you've just got to make sure you capture the song and the moment and stuff like that. Well, during COVID, everybody was stuck at home. Tim was in Auckland, I was in West Sussex in England, and he just rang up one day, got in touch and said, do you have any tunes with a Latin beat I could write top lines for and work together? And we started doing it. It was a great comfort during COVID. We were all stuck inside, and it was a very scary time, but again, music came to the rescue to sort of help soothe one during that period, and it just shows the power and the good medicinal power for your brain of music. And so it really reinforced everything that I thought about why we listen to music and why it's good to listen to music. It's good to play music and just be involved in everything to do with music. So, so we ended up doing 24 songs. It was incredible. And I sent him a song, he was in Auckland because of the time change. I went to sleep the next morning, he'd sent it back already. It was like incredible genius, he'd sent it with the words and everything. I said, well, have you got a book, or you've written down hundreds of words or something? You just try and I think it's one of the best things I've ever been involved in. Yeah, so if you haven't heard it, check it out.
I think we can all agree we're living in a pretty crazy world at the moment. And Phil, I understand you have some thoughts on music serving as self-help during these very intriguing times.
My contribution to the craziness that's going on is to try and do some music that helps people, listen, and soothes people in these crazy times in the world. And some people are good at something, some people are good at others, but when one tries to justify what you do, that is the bottom line, help with music.
Great, well, I think we are going to close out another performance.
Anil, thank you so much for prompting me and to sort of surviving. Okay, so I'm just going to play a track called Diamond Head. Incidentally, these backing tracks that I'm playing along to, they are the original backing tracks of the thing. So we have here Paul Thompson on drums, we have John Weston on bass, we have Eddie Johnson on keyboards, we have Brian Eno on sorted stuff.